Day of CEDF's online innovation forum. As you guys know, today it's titled Tourism Opportunities in Northern Manitoba. And I just want to take care of a few housekeeping items right away. And I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but please, if you're not about to speak, if you can have your mics off, that really helps with cutting down on any background noise. Also, Leanne will be monitoring the chat box for anyone that has any questions or concerns. And also, as I mentioned yesterday, all of the presentations that you guys are seeing where the presenter has either a PDF or any written presentation, we're going to try and have those all up for you on our website towards the latter end of next week. So in saying that, I'm going to I want to welcome everyone, and I want to welcome to start off Colin Ferguson, who's the president and CEO of Travel Manitoba. Now, Colin joined Travel Manitoba as president and CEO in early 2011. He's had the opportunity to travel to all corners of the province. He's done a lot of active traveling. I've witnessed it myself when I go to a number of our northern communities, and you will see Colin there. He's experienced all that makes Manitoba an ideal travel destination. Well known in the Winnipeg advertising and marketing community, prior to joining Travel Manitoba, he was a partner in Ferguson Walker Marketing, Communication, and earlier the senior partner and general partner of Palmer Jarvis Advertising, working with local and provincial and national clients. Colin's also been very active in the not-for-profit sector as one of the founding directors of Partners in the Park, now has Sindpoint Park Conservatory, president of the Children's Hospital Research Foundation, and a strategic planning and marketing lead for Winnipeg's hosting of the 1999 Pan Am Games. Colin is also the founder of the Canadian women's bandy team, headquartered in Winnipeg and currently ranked fourth in the world. And after I read Colin's bio, I had to type in bandy because I honestly didn't know what that was, and I got very much, educated on that. So if you guys can all welcome Colin from Travel Manitoba.
Well, thank you very much, Oswald. That was a very kind introduction. I appreciate that, and welcome to everybody who's on the line this morning. As we get more and more comfortable doing these kinds of meetings, I feel like I'm auditioning to do the national news, and watching the styles of everybody on the line is really quite interesting and fascinating. So I won't be very long today. I think Oswald's given me about 8 minutes or something like that. And so with that, I'm just going to jump straight into it. Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to join you virtually as we look at opportunities for tourism in Manitoba's north. Now, this is a region where we see great potential for tourism to help grow and diversify the economy, but it's also one where visitors can connect with Manitoba's northern nature and culture in meaningful ways. It is no surprise that the tourism industry has dramatically been affected by the pandemic. And while Manitoba has fared better than many other Canadian jurisdictions who rely more on international visitation, our estimates indicate a best case scenario for tourism revenue losses of between 45 and 60% year over year. Now, at the best, that's a $720 million loss, and at the worst, that's close to a $1 billion drop in tourism spend year over year. In order to mitigate the anticipated declines, especially with border closures and additional travel restrictions now in place, Travel Manitoba turned its marketing attention to locals. Our Summer Home is Where the Heart Is hyper-local campaign focused on encouraging residents to show Manitoba some love. And results from the June to September campaign show increased engagement on our website and social media. as well as we saw some really significant numbers, hopefully comparable to, year over year. And while we don't actually have those visitation and spending numbers, and we won't see that until well into 2021, anecdotally, we have heard from a number of drive-to lodges, campgrounds, golf courses, and resorts from around the province that fared quite well. In fact, many stating that 2020 has been their best summer ever. These destinations who were fearing the worst have come through their high season hoping that the Manitobans who came to visit them this year will come again year after year. Now, growing tourism in Northern Manitoba remains a priority for Travel Manitoba. When we launched the Northern Manitoba Tourism Strategy back in 2017, there was already a strong foundation for tourism in the region. And over the past 3 years, we have been working with stakeholders to advance the strategy. And even during these uncertain times, we are pushing ahead with our plan to support tourism development in the North. That said, we are very pleased to be working with Community Futures in the North to complete the snowmobile trail between Snow Lake and Cranberry Portage. I know there are many snowmobiling enthusiasts who hope this portion of the trail will be completed this year, resulting in a network of groomed trails that stretches from the Pas-au-Chien to Gillam. We are presently working with a tour operator to organize a snowmobile trip from Thompson to Churchill, scheduled for late winter 2021. And that said, snowmobiling will be a key experience featured in Manitoba, in Travel Manitoba rather, winter campaign, as we in the Snowmobile Working Committee, SLED MB 53, promote the North as a tremendous snowmobiling destination. Now, it's clearly no surprise that fishing and hunting remains a top driver for tourism in the northern region. Overall, we know that this sector throughout the province contributes some $480 million in direct spending in Manitoba, close to 30% of our annual tourism revenues. This summer, we were pleased to have hosted fishing influencers to the region to promote fishing specifically in the Flin Flon, the Pas-au-Chien, and Thompson regions. And ice fishing, which is one of the fastest growing experiences in Manitoba, will be a key driver as we focus on marketing in our winter campaign. We are also pleased to support individual projects to improve tourism destinations in the area. This includes a viewing platform to be built by the Opaskwayak Trail Committee later this month as a start to a project on Grace Lake east of the Pas-au-Chien. Improvements to infrastructure, as we all know, lead to improvements in the visitor experience. Another recent success is the partnership between Travel Manitoba, Community Futures, and Look North to bring tailored packages available for consumer purchase through the Bandwango platform. We're looking forward to working with our partners in the North to further explore how this platform, which sells packages and passes, can provide easier access to tourism experiences and products to visitors. And while we can celebrate some accomplishments, we are also sobered by the incredibly difficult position we find our tourism industry in. Our world-class fly-in fishing lodges and hunting camps who depend on American visitors are facing real challenges. Our Churchill operators who depend on international visitation are also feeling the pain year over year with diminished bookings and shortened seasons. Fortunately for the latter, Manitobans chose to travel north to see beluga whales and now polar bears, as well as many who took to the road to experience all that the North has to offer. That said, we acknowledge the many challenges our tourism industry is currently facing, and Travel Manitoba is continuing to advocate on behalf of the tourism industry to all governmental departments and levels of government for much needed support to ensure the future growth and success of the tourism industry. We know the tourism industry is important because it is a significant part of Manitoba's economy. It impacts communities across the entirety of the province, and it supports culture preservation, such as our diverse heritage sites and Indigenous communities. It too is a significant export industry, and it is a diversified industry that impacts a large number of sectors, including that of accommodations, food and beverage, just to mention a few. And finally, tourism can play an important role in creating an inclusive society, one in which visitors have the opportunity to learn and be transformed by the people they meet, places they visit, and the experiences they embark on. And we know the future will be full of challenges, but we also know that by working together, we can effectively market all the amazing tourism experiences that Manitoba has to offer. Thank you very much. Back to you, Oz.
Well, thank you, Colin. And you know what? I just want to also say thanks to Colin. You know, Colin's played and Travel Manitoba has played such a huge role in growing tourism, and also to really have everyone understand that tourism has become such a huge driver for our economy. So, and we've said that a number of times over the years, and it's really been showed by the growth in dollars spent in that industry, the amount of jobs being created in that industry, and also to touch on Colin's last comment, and I just want to say it again, it's played such a huge role in us to understand each other, understand the different cultures. So Colin, thank you, and look, North CDF looks forward to working more together in the future. And with our experiential tourism that we'll talk about next, I can guarantee with Travel Manitoba, we'll be knocking on your doors a lot to help for you to do what you do best, promoting local tourism assets. So thank you again. Next, we're going to welcome Celeste Devar, who's the owner operator of Earth Rhythms Experiential Tourism business, now located in Gaspereau Valley of Nova Scotia. Celeste started Earth Rhythms in 1996 while living in Ananola outside Riding Mountain National Park. He is a tourism operator, facilitator, and experiential tourism coach, creating innovation innovative experience with community partners to surprise and delight travelers. He loves working with local folks to help them create high value, high yield experiences. His passion and purpose are aligned around the things he cares most about: local stories, nutritious food, cultural traditions, climate change, art, live music, and nature. It's all about community economic development through responsible and regenerative tourism, where the bottom line is a triple bottom line, ensuring environmental responsibility, social accountability, and profitability for communities as hosts and travelers as guests. Celeste has been coaching and supporting community-based experiential tourism development with tourism businesses and other stakeholders in Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, PEI, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland for the past 15 years. And Celeste has just spent the last months with our staff, and he's going to be talking about experiential tourism. So Celeste, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Oswald, and I really appreciate this opportunity. It's great to follow Colin and the perspectives that he's bringing from Travel Manitoba. What I'd like to do in this session is two things. I want to give you a front-end presentation about experiential tourism and building around some of the things that I shared with the CEDF team over the month of October. And that presentation will be about 30 minutes, and then we're going to break out into rooms where you're going to meet some of the CEDF facilitators and have an opportunity to brainstorm some ideas as part of the Envision Edge facilitation that's taking place here. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to switch over to my presentation here and walk you through that. It's fairly dense. It's pretty compact in terms of information, and so bear with me as I jump through this. So some things to think about in terms of how experiential tourism is being received. I think travelers from around the world are very much looking for more than just buying souvenirs. They're actually collecting experiences. We travel not to escape life, but for life not to escape us. A real indication of the desire that people have to experience places and people and stories. So there is a promise in terms of what Northern Manitoba can offer. And when we look at that promise, it comes from two perspectives. One is what travelers changing motivations and desires for travel are, but at the same time, it's the way that a variety of provinces, business owners, communities are beginning to actually add new experiences to the business mix in terms of how tourism is done. So I want to make sure I cover three things with you today in terms of experiential tourism. They are fundamental to thinking about how you, with a fishing lodge, with infrastructure, with fishing as an activity, with your own community, with arts and culture that are within the northern context of Manitoba, that you're thinking about these three things as we move forward in terms of product development and tourism. The first is that programming generates revenues. Infrastructure by itself doesn't. So when we have infrastructure, whether it's community infrastructure, business infrastructure, a lodge, it's how we start to think about adding the programming and the revenues that come with that. The second that is really critical to experiential tourism is the notion and the importance that the heart of an experience is a guide or storyteller, who we could call an experience partner. They're paid to share that story. And the third is that many experience partners may not actually consider themselves to be part of the tourism industry. They may see themselves as partners, and we might call them non-traditional. So who is an experience partner? Well, they could be people who are wood carvers, they could be photographers, they could be a First Nations community member who is making artisan or craft. It could be a fisher. All of these are potential experience partners who could be coached to create an experience. If you look at what TripAdvisor has been as the global aggregator been looking at in terms of how trends are changing in 2019 and actually into 2020, there are three big areas that are being teased out. One is the notion of health and wellness. And when you think about the northern context for Manitoba, one of the things that Stephanie Johnson has pointed out to us from CEDF is the notion that the idea that being in the north offers solace and silence and quiet and the opportunity to slow down. In terms of new skills, people are looking for many new skills, whether they be survival skills in terms of being in the bush, whether they be making a snowshoe and being able to make crafts. And certainly if we look at some of the changes that are taking place in terms of how the composition of group travel is, families and groups, particularly at this time in terms of COVID, are very much looking for things to do. Whether they are on the ground regional travelers in Northern Manitoba, coming from Saskatchewan, Northwestern Ontario, or from within Manitoba, or whether they're flying in. These are all three things that TripAdvisor has certainly indicated are part of the consideration for how tourism experiences can be delivered. This really opens the door for thinking about where do new experiences offer you resilience as a business, as a community, or as a collection of communities in Northern Manitoba. And I think that there's a widespread awareness that there's a sense of urgency to find long-term resilient development pathways that put people in touch with nature and the communities and the people that live in those communities. So there's some things that are interesting if we look at that and how COVID has actually asked us with a bit of a pause to look at some new things, or not new things, but perhaps some revised things about how travel can take place. One of them is in travel sentiment surveys that are taking place in multiple provinces across Canada, it's really clear that safety is paramount for people. Safety in terms of how they get to a place, and safety when they get there, and safety for themselves during the time that they're there. Which means that one of the things that Northern Manitoba offers is the opportunity that if people come and stay and book, they are probably going to think about how they can extend their stay. That presents an interesting return on investment in terms of an extra day or an extra night or an extra 2 days, as long as some of the experiences are available to be able to take part in local culture, travel locally, learn from local people, have food that is from the local area. That in itself is probably one of the biggest promises in terms of experiential tourism. and potentially the training that could take place for people as local guides and storytellers to be paid a living wage as part of the experience. As Colin mentioned, tourism globally, federally, nationally, and provincially, and within our own businesses has taken a huge and dramatic hit. So there's some realities around how we adapt and do differently. And I think experiences can offer that. And I want to give you some examples through the next 20 minutes in terms of what's possible. And there will be certainly, and has already been, an interest in more private tours, custom programs, and personalized packages in which an experience or experiences are part of that. So what is experiential travel anyway? Let's start with a bit of a definition. So these are pieces of the development process that I want to share with you that are essential to thinking about how an experience is different from perhaps a tour. It's very immersive. It's very hands-on. It's a way of engaging travelers to local people and their stories and the places they visit. It's a creative process. Experience design is not just simply putting together a few elements and giving it a name and putting it out into the marketplace. There's actually a recipe of ingredients. And when doing that, you want to make sure that all 5 senses are fully engaged in developing that. Destination Canada has a saying that a tourism product is what we buy. A tourism experience is what we remember. I think we're in the business of creating memories, and for that there's a price to be paid by the traveler. Experiences can take place over an hour, over half a day, over a full day, or over several days if they're staying in a particular community or at a lodge. And so travelers take home those memories and become advocates for Northern Manitoba. I want to put in front of you that in putting an experience together, one of the things that we're becoming really aware of is that these experiences that people travel to and from and learn from have the potential to be transformative, meaning people go away with an, aha, I didn't know that. And how does that make sense for me where I live in Toronto or where I live in Winnipeg or where I live in the Pas? These are pieces of the questions that travelers are asking. So in any given region, one of the things we are well aware of from a community development process is that there are kind of like cogs in a wheel that are all interacting. Marketing partners, tourism partners, local economic development partners. And for any region in Manitoba, I have learned, having lived there for 38 years, that each area of the province has its own places, community, traditions, people, and storytellers. And within that context, there are 5 major areas from which experiences can emerge. The world of art, the world of nature, the world of culture and local cultural traditions, the world of cuisine, and wellness. But what's cool is that if you include 2 or more of these elements, they become the sweet spot. So when you create, for example, an outdoor foraging experience, if you include food as part of that, the tasting or a cultural experience, food is critical to remembering that experience. When you put all of these together, using a set of ingredients, you can customize and put that experience together, develop it, test it out, develop some digital collateral to go with that, and feed the marketing platforms that you'll be using, and be able to take that to a variety of audiences. Well, you might be thinking, how does this fit into my business? So I want to give you a couple of examples. We call this the progression of economic value. If we had been talking about experiential tourism 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to talk about it in the same way that we can talk about it today. So I want to give you a bit of a framework for thinking about where experiences fit in. So on the vertical axis that you see there would be the competitive appeal of a particular business, going from low differentiation to greater differentiation. And along the bottom, your costing and pricing, going from retail pricing on the left to more value-based pricing on the right. You might ask, what is value-based pricing? It's a different kind of question. So instead of saying, this is how much it cost me to put this experience together, and I got to mark it up 50%, you actually ask a different question. For the value of this experience, which is unique to this area, and includes these people who live here, what is the value of that experience? What are people prepared to pay? So you're asking some different questions, which leads to thinking about a greater return on investment. Experiences allow you to think about where in the range of markets you want to fit your experience into. Is it into some of the larger group packages? Is it niche markets that are coming? Or can you actually add something that is more personalized or customized, which leads you from kind of a high volume situation on the right-hand side with lower yields to maybe thinking about layering in some new experiences that are low volume, smaller numbers of people, more intimate, less impact on the resources, and a higher yield. This is called the progression of economic value, where we shift from perhaps commodities to packaging them into goods to creating services and activities to experiences. And as you'll notice, experiences tend to have a higher price point, a greater return on emotion, and the opportunity to work with smaller groups. So let me give you an example of a place where I've done some coaching in Northern Alberta, just north of Edmonton, Prairie Gardens and Adventure Farm. And we were working with Tam Anderson. This is a location which is probably the northernmost location for pumpkin growing in Canada. And she invited us to help her to create some new experiences. So about 45 minutes north of Edmonton is her farm. She would say it's a 35-acre farm where they connect visitors back to the land. They offer 50 activities on farm at the present time. But one of the challenges she had was that when she goes into wintertime, around November and up until March, the greenhouses that they have on their farm are not being utilized. And she began to ask if there's a different way of generating revenues with experiences. So if you look at her farm, she has typical commodities in the summertime, fall time, vegetables that are grown, you pick farm. She also has on her farm a store. Her store features goods that are handmade by local people, whether it's jams and jellies, a variety of handmade pottery, artisan crafts. She also has an online store. In addition, she has a variety of different ways that the farm serves as a stage for some different activities. Farm tours, weddings, farm events. The price point, as you'll see, has been changing from the lower price point of the commodity to what she offers as retail goods in the store to now more customizing the kinds of things that people can do with farm tours and weddings where they actually rent the farm or the corn maze. And then she created something brand new. It's called Fire Roaster Long Table Dinners. The price point has changed dramatically. This is for the market out of Edmonton who are looking for unusual ways to be able to be together as a group. So it's a group product. And she created this concept and layered it into her model of how she has commodities for sale, things at her store, activities and experiences, and experiences. They all generate revenue. The experiences were layered in as a higher generating revenue model. And here's what it looks like. What I love about what she's done is she has used the concept of Fire Roaster Long Table Dinners to actually theme out other variations on a theme. Fire Roaster Christmas parties, Fire Roaster corporate outings, Fire Roaster campfires, Fire Roaster cooking classes. And so with that, she has created something that in the last 2 winters prior to COVID, she was generating somewhere around $40,000 between November and February, the end of February, at a time of year when she did not have any revenues at all. So what she's inviting us to think about is, with this kind of an example, is what are the opportunities in Northern Manitoba? This is the digital collateral that she creates for each of the experiences that are downloadable as PDFs. Travel Manitoba could have things like this. Your own CEDF team could have these. They're ways for people to learn what the call to action is, what's included in the experience, and how to book. If you were to ask Tam what's been successful about this, she would say, we all grow our businesses by supporting each other. There's a lot of flexibility in how we adjust our price, and it exposes new businesses with relatively little risk. They're inspiring each other. One of the most important things is that guests love meeting people from the community. And the municipality sees this as a big win. So I think about this, and I think about Northern Manitoba. How could the inland fishery be the heart of a suite of new Northern Manitoba experiences that include learning about the fishery, but maybe also developing a new form of Northern cuisine, making and cooking a shore lunch together, life skills that come from living by the edge of the water. How could non-timber forest products be shifted to also be non-timber forest experiences? What would be the value proposition? How much will people pay for that? Or how might you create a luxury winter camping experience in a cabin to experience night and northern lights in the shelter of the forest and make your own snowshoes to take away? What is ordinary to you is extraordinary to people who come from away. And because of that, you can help them see the extraordinary in a personally guided storytelling way. The economic value comes from charging the guest for the privilege of learning about your ordinary. Another example I want to give you is a fellow I've coached. He's a woodworker in Southern Ontario. And I want to show you how an experience has changed his perspective about adding revenue to his business, which he would say, he lives in a small rural town in old tobacco country west of Hamilton in Southern Ontario. And this is what he does. He would say that's what he does. He's a woodworker. He creates charcuterie boards. Every kind of charcuterie board you can think of, small, large, feasting boards. The woods that you're using are all dead trees that come from the Carolinian forest. And he basically begins to craft them into a variety of different boards. He also has feasting boards where people can sit down and eat at large tables. So what is this experience? Well, he takes you out on a bit of an outing in the morning, have a cup of tea around a fire, and you go into the woods to learn from him about the reverence that he has for the forest and the Carolinian forest, and to see from the forest from the inside as he would. You come back to his shop and you choose your own live edge board. It could be poplar, it could be maple, black walnut, butternut. He has all of these woods. And then you start drawing out your own board. You create that board, you sand it, you use his shop tools with all of the safety and protocols that are in place, and you feast together in the middle of the day, having pretty much made your own board to take away. What Dave realized was the board was not the product, it was the story. It was a light bulb moment for him. And I really want to stress this, that people want access to stories. And in the process, they want to do things with the storyteller, the heart of a great experience. So Dave would say that Tree to Table, which is the name of his experience, has become a reflection of his real life. And that's the story he tells. So a few things that he has shared with me is that the first time he offered this experience in 2018, he only put it into the spring and into the fall when he had scheduled capacity outside of his production of the woodworking to sell those experiences. He sold out 4 weekends in May, 4 weekends in September and October. Again in 2019, and again this fall in 2020, he has sold out with COVID protocols in place in terms of people wearing masks, coming in bubbles. In year one, revenues from this new experience as a woodworker were 7% of his annual revenue. In year two, 12%. This has continued even with COVID into the new year. Some things have changed in the way that he sees his business. He sees his business as a way for him to advocate a better understanding, an understanding for a better planet. He sees experiences as adding new revenues for him that are high yield. Not replacing his woodworking, just adding something new he had never thought about for new customers. And it changed the design of their new shop. So he had not planned for a production space in his new shop. He added about 10% to the capital budget for his new project to include space where people could make these new boards. This is what his marketing flat sheet looks like. And I remember a question I asked Dave at the beginning when I coached him. I said, so Dave, what do you think you should charge for your experience? He said, $99. And I said, why? He said, well, that's because that's what I charge for a board. So you want to charge $99 for a board, but you're putting all this time into creating an experience and delivering it. So we worked him up from $99 to $275 per person, which is what it sells for at the present time. These are sold out in the time slots that he makes them available. So when I look at the craftspeople, the artists, the musicians, the foragers, and the storytellers, the Indigenous community in Northern Manitoba, I have some questions for you. Who are your storytellers that will share their stories as new revenue-generating experiences? Where are the stages in Northern Manitoba that you can do this? And how will you develop a strategy to thrive with everyone who tells that story or creates that experience being paid a living wage? Again, the idea being that programming generates revenues. So, Northern Manitoba is very rich when you think of it in terms of artists, and fishers, and craftspeople, and foragers, and snowshoe makers. And I'm sure if you had half an hour, the list could be over 30 or 40. So that brings me to the importance of Indigenous tourism in Canada and why, what is available and rich and abundant in Northern Manitoba is aligned with the power of Indigenous tourism in Canada and what's changing in Canada. You may be aware that in 2019, the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada produced a set of national guidelines to develop authentic Indigenous experiences. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend that you download this. This is probably one of the best experience development guides I have seen in Canada over the last 10 years. And it's come from the Indigenous Tourism Association. They really help us to understand what cultural tourism experiences are, why they have tourism appeal, and the responsibility that we have to remain true to the past and present the culture of Indigenous communities. Authenticity is at the heart of this. And if you go to Indigenous Canada today, to the website, this is what you will see that is being offered now as part of the Canadian story of what travelers can experience in almost every province across this country. You may or may not be aware also that the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada has formed a partnership with Airbnb to visit a variety of different Indigenous tourism experiences across Canada. This is unprecedented, that a major search engine like this is available to the world to be able to create kind of opportunities to travel across Canada using Airbnb as the search engine. Holly Kirshen joined us in October. She's the Manitoba Regional Coordinator for the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. She's an entrepreneur, and she is finding ways to connect Indigenous communities to the opportunities, the resources, and the advice that is necessary to be able to create tourism businesses and new experiences. And she is very accessible and very excited about what is developing in Canada, in Manitoba. Travel Manitoba has developed a memorandum with ITAC for the development of a variety of new Indigenous experiences. This memorandum of understanding sets the foundation for a number of different organizations and businesses to be part of the evolving growth that's taking place. It's a good vision. It's an embracing vision. It's an inclusive vision. When you think of the Northern Manitoba and the number of communities that are there and the ability to tell stories, create experiences, and market those to Canada and to the world is important. So who's offering experiential tourism? Just so you know, G Adventures, a global operator. You know that Frontiers North is doing that. Great Spirit Circle Trail on Manitoulin Island. An organization, global organization out of the UK called Responsible Travel. Friendly Planet Travel. Road Scholar, Pure Life, a number of wineries. And specific to each country are a number of different operators. So what are some of the differentiators for Northern Manitoba experiences? Culture. I think Oswald told me there's somewhere over 50 northern communities. That's a richness of culture in the boreal forest, around lakes, around the Churchill area, around Thompson, Paw, waterfalls, rivers, culture that is developed around a boreal environment. People who have stories about their culture, about foods, about ways of living. There's an opportunity to develop a series of Northern Manitoba experiential guides. As different from fishing and hunting guides, their role is to tell the story, to create the experiences. They could be fishing guides who are also experiential guides. Many opportunities to create experiences about culture, the northern forests that are not just in Churchill, but are in other places in northern Manitoba. Water-based travel in the summer and fall, but also walking on water in the winter. Maybe there's an opportunity to invent, develop, and expand a northern culinary wild food menu, working with people who are chefs at the lodges, who are indigenous keepers of ways of cooking and sharing food. It's remote. It's not for everybody, but there will be people coming who will seek this out. And when they do, it's anticipated that they'll stay longer and visit multiple communities. So there's a mindset for experiential tourism at this time. How can you be collaborative with all of your communities, working together, as opposed to individual communities or individual businesses? Northern Manitoba is huge, as you are well aware, and your communities are well separated. How do you pull together and present yourself as a suite of stories and experiences for the world in one location on the web, on the World Wide Web? What would that look like? Championing what's local is an individual, a community, and an organizational responsibility. Practicing sustainability is what travelers are looking for as they look to reduce their carbon footprint through travel, as they look for local food as part of what they eat locally. When you think as a destination, I would encourage you to think about you as a community, a host community, welcoming guests to your communities, the whole of Northern Manitoba. And I think we can ask guests to behave appropriately when they arrive in our communities. It is business. It's new dollars. There's single experiences, multiple experiences, and in multiple locations. And it is high yield. In my view, I think that COVID-19 is a pause, but it's also an opportunity to shift how we think about tourism, particularly in terms of where experiences fit into our businesses, into our destinations, into our communities. So with that, this will be an opportunity for us to shift. Where do you start? With what already exists. That is, the storytellers that are in your backyard, the stories that have been told, the places that you take to be ordinary, the infrastructure that already exists, and begin to craft them into experiences. So I'm just going to back out of my presentation here and introduce what we're going to do in the breakout rooms. And then I'll ask our host in Vision to switch us over to the 3 breakout rooms. So here's what's going to take place. We're going to divide everybody into 3 different breakout rooms. And when we do that, you'll be going to a room where there will be a CEDF facilitator who has already taken the training last October. And they're set up to put in front of you in each of your breakout rooms a specific situation. And you'll have a chance to share thoughts and ideas for about 35, 40 minutes before we bring you back into the main room. What we've set up is that make sure that when you go to your chat room that you open your chat box, because each of the CEDF facilitators will put a brief description of the situation in your chat room. So that's a different chat room than the one that's here in the main breakout room, so you'll need to open that. You'll have a chance to chat. Feel free to bring up any ideas. This is not a place to be blocked in terms of ideas. We're looking for all of your ideas. And so we encourage you to do that. I think that's it. And I think I'll just ask David or Ryan to flip us over to the 3 breakout rooms where you'll meet your CEDF facilitators.
No, Ken is.
Okay, so what is your scenario?
We're doing the lodge, fishing lodge value add.
All right, why don't you just read through the fishing lodge value add so everybody can hear?
I absolutely will.
If you want, Stephanie, I can share screen with that blue card for you as well as you're reading through.
That would be perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Steph. I haven't been briefed on this at all, so I don't even know which blue card you're using.
That's okay. I guess you're going to learn with the rest of them, hey?
Yeah.
So just for those of you that don't know who I am Stephanie Johnson. I am the Look North Economic Development Advisor who's responsible for tourism. So lucky you get to hang out with me. I've been working with Celeste since, I guess, last November on experiential tourism in this development. So I'm quite excited that we can finally actually get this information out to the North and see what it can bring. So today we're going to be focusing on fishing lodges, value added for the fishing lodging. COVID-19 has drastically changed tourism. In Northern Manitoba, fishing lodges have generally experienced a substantial negative impact, which may last for years, if not longer. With the uncertainty associated with when Manitoba will again open its borders with the other nations, the US and other provinces, there is a realization that for the next several years, there will be a need for fishing lodges to re-examine their operations and assess what services can be provided for travelers from Manitoba, Northwestern Ontario, and Western Canada. CEDF and their community partners have been asked to examine the opportunities for increased value adds at existing fishing lodges to add new revenues, expand the offers at lodges to include much more than just fishing, and increase the ways the lodges and local communities collaborate. What are some easy wins to develop new revenue generating community partners experiences that can be developed that can help lodge guests do other local unique hands-on activities and encourage them to stay longer? So
I don't know if everyone can see my screen. I just put the blue card on. Okay.
We're good. It's there. Our strategic mission are local community partnerships that expand the value-added opportunities at fishing lodges. Our strategic exclusion, self-guided activities with no fees attached. We no longer want to give away the beauty of the North. We should be paid for the knowledge that we have. Tactical constraints, time involved to coach community partners to deliver an experience, and the minimum viable experience ready in 6 months. So I'd like to open it up now for just some ideas. No idea is a bad idea. We want to hear what everybody has to say in regards to what you've learned about experiential tourism and how you can see any value added to any of our lodges within our area, because as we know, we have a large volume of them.
Yeah, I'll throw an idea out there. I was actually looking for this recently and couldn't find it anywhere in Manitoba. And that's actually a kayak tour or paddle boarding where you stand up on it, where you can go to a lodge and they take you around different areas of the lake where there's actually caves. There's even some drawings on the rocks and stuff like that from back in the past. But somebody would actually guide you there and show you and make sure you're safe at the same time.
Actually, we have been hearing anecdotally of individuals who have booked in drive-to resorts, not to fish, but just to come up and in a lot of cases, these are new Canadians. They have asked if they could just come up and they will pay for the guide. They would just like to get in a boat and go out on a lake. And I'm not 100% sure which one was the experience, whether the experience was being in a boat or whether the experience was being on the lake. I'm not 100% sure which one it was. I think it's the former, but nonetheless, I mean, I love these kinds of brainstormings, and I've worked with Celeste ever since day one at Travel Manitoba, so I know where this could go. One of the challenges that we do hear, though, and we hear this specifically from the fishing lodges, is, and the biggest challenge, I think, is not coming up with ideas on how they could pivot. It's how we can actually pivot them as operators. They see themselves as fishing camps, and regrettably, they don't see themselves a whole lot beyond that. And I'll give you an example. Arguably, this is a fly-in camp, but nonetheless, Aikens Lake Lodge has create an indigenous experience called Pathway of the Voyageurs, which was spectacular. I took it when I was up there, and you got to go down the river system, and you were reading all the different artworks on the rocks and everything. It was really well done. And the guide was really good at explaining what you were seeing, and I really appreciated it. But it is offered to virtually everybody who goes up there, and very few took advantage of it because these guys are anglers. They just want to hammer fish all day long. And so it's, and you know, if the guides and the operation don't support these new kinds of opportunities, it makes it difficult for them to advance them. But it's, I think the real challenge with the fishing industry is actually changing the fishing industry, so they look at it differently. I mean, we've talked to many of them about doing photography tours. I mean, you fly into some of these places or drive to some of these places. They're exquisite. They're spectacular, and there's very few people there. It's getting the operators to physically pivot. They know what they know, and they do what they do. And, you know, their focus is just so much on get the big fish, get the American angler, get the Manitoba angler, Canadian angler, whomever. But when you start talking about doing, you know, how to cook fish courses, those kinds of things, I think that can be added to the experience. I'm not sure that it is the experience. Anyway, that's just what we hear from them on a regular basis. They're a tough group to change, but they need some help.
Here's Colin. Oh, just a quick question, Stephanie. Colin, do you think if there was more opportunities where rather than them having to oversee any additional stuff, if you had these partners that came forward to say, okay, you know what, I'll run this experience if I can partner with your facility, would that help? Is it because they feel that this is just another thing that they're going to have to take care of?
In some ways, you've hit the nail on the head. They're not opposed to the concepts. I think that they're so focused on running their business the way they always ran their business that sometimes it's difficult for them to look at a different opportunity. If there were people that were prepared to partner with them, I think that there are a number of them that would take them up on that opportunity. I mean, we put ice fishing to many of them. Many of the lodges closed in the wintertime, and some of them have opened, and they were shocked at how much business they were able to generate. And in some cases, some are now winterizing their facilities in an effort to get on board. But 5 years ago, if you said, you know, have you ever thought about ice fishing? They'd say, yeah, there's no market there. It's just not there. We believe it's the fastest growing tourism product in Manitoba right now. And so how do we capitalize on that one? Because you don't need to stay at a lodge. You don't need to, I mean, people are out by themselves, but there's all kinds of things that we could do around ice fishing as a product that could expand the experience and the opportunity, particularly for some of the local communities who could benefit. I'm thinking of, you know, in the South, I'm thinking of places like Winnipeg Beach and Gimli and others. But certainly in the North, exactly the same.
Colin, when and I'm thinking about everybody in the breakout room here, when we think about, there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation here in terms of creating an experience, but also layering it into a business and also reaching new markets. What is the way that will help this change to occur, where some of these cultural opportunities or culinary opportunities or things that are value adds can actually become part of the offer and reach new markets?
You know, Celeste, this is not going to come as a surprise to you because I think you've been advocating this for years. But if you can get somebody who is regarded in the industry to take on new things, and they see success, and the success is seen by others, it has that way of growing that industry. We had this goes back 5 or 6 years ago, but we had a couple of operators who came to us looking for social media assistance and how could they get into the digital world. And they have succeeded in such unbelievable ways and have become expert in it, that they have been able to sell out their businesses very quickly. And others are now following them. So in some ways, somebody comes up with a great idea, Travel Manitoba promotes and markets it, others see it and they go, hey, wait a minute, I can do these kinds of things. This is, and none of this is, I mean, what you described in some of your examples were, you know, they were very clever pivots. They had facilities sitting idle and they chose to turn them into something else. There's an operator in Southern Manitoba that's a fish farm. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's no water anywhere around them, and they've got 50,000 lake trout in this facility. And they realized that their parking lot was only used by cars, so they turned it into a restaurant and actually sold the fish right out of there. So they looked at it completely differently. They created an entirely new marketplace where it wasn't people just coming for retail. They were coming for an experience.
And that's kind of, I think, part of the gift that COVID has kind of given us. We are in an opportunity right now where people are almost forced to pivot because we don't have the American travelers anymore. And if you're just looking at the local or regional fishermen and anglers to be your main income, I don't know that that market is there. There's enough of that. That's where adding these experiences, then you may get the family to come, because I'm sure he's going to catch the giant fish. The kids will go along and do that for a little bit. They might do that for a day or two. They're not going to want to spend a week at the lodge. But adding experiences that intrigues, whether the wife can go and do yoga in the sun in the front lawn while he's out fishing, I think really changes the dynamics of that and changes your market. And the nice thing about it, as Celeste had discussed, is that now you're looking at COVID-friendly smaller groups. So now we can, essentially you can take an entire family, bring them to this lodge. He can go off and do the fishing like they've always done, the same with it. But if you've got one or two other experiences that tie into this that are of interest to the rest of the family, you're going to be able to captivate them. I'm just curious to hear from the ones that aren't in the tourism industry that are possibly, you know, offering any of these things, and just curious to hear from.
But what about the experiences?
I think one of the challenges, I mean, that's you know, for the group as a whole right now is, I mean, between us, we know, I mean, we're here kind of somewhat facilitated, but Andrea has this goal of what she's been working on and drive to do so and see that flourish and forward. We do have Paint Lake Lodge on here as well. But one of the things I think we're missing as the whole is to look at if we need to, in this group, focus on a regional aspect and a multi-day tour, is we need to know who's all out there and what everybody's offering. So we need to, that's like, I think one of the first things is who's existing out there right now, like you said in the introduction, Becky, of, you know, this could be, it just needs some massaging. People are doing things right now, but how do we tweak those? Is there, you know, building that, I guess, index of who's where and what they're providing, and then, you know, build packages to create, okay, go from, you know, does somebody want to go from just OCN to possibly to Rocky Lake area? You've got Al McLaughlin's there, to maybe over to Flin Flon, and then is that it for their regionalism, or do they you know, it could be a multitude of areas. It could be like you said, a 2 or 3 day, so 1 or 2 communities, or giving our geographical size, if it's 7, okay, so we build in multiple going all the way up to maybe Lynn, Leaf Rapids, wherever, but you need to know what's out there.
Yeah, like the idea that comes to mind for me is you base it around communities, yes, but then the experiences that you experience around the community. So you come to Thompson, spend the night there, and then experience, you know, Pishu Falls. That's something unique close to Thompson. You could go up to Leaf and Lynn, have a camp night there because that's an unique experience, and then you could travel to Snow Lake, see Wekusko Falls. It's all in the region, and you'll be moving community to community, and you'll be experiencing different culture in each community, but it'll all be relatively Northern Manitoba.
As
Well,
someone
exactly. Yeah.
Oops, sorry. As someone that's coming in from Winnipeg, I remember as a young lady going up to on a trip through Thompson up to Churchill, And one of the things that I remembered about it is the wildlife and stuff that we saw. So I think that would be a really good thing to do, where perhaps you have a day where you go by boat travel and you're out on the water, whichever lake it is, maybe doing fishing, seeing wildlife as one day, experiencing the culture another day, and then the third day rolling it all in together and putting that group meal or the arts classes together, so that you sort of close the whole thing, where maybe your artwork and stuff is about the wildlife or about the culture or about the food and that type of thing. So I would say a 2 to 3 day thing would be a great thing. And I think personally, I would be interested in something like that.
I think also, I was just building on that. Yeah, that just gave me the idea too of tying in with Churchill, because that was one thing that like the center that we want to build would be, you know, close to the train station. So, you know, so people could come and do their classes or whatnot at the art center for a day, and then move on to Churchill for, you know, that experience.
The problem with that, Andrea, is that now in Churchill, correct me if I'm wrong, I've been away from Manitoba for a few years, is that it's pretty much shut down. So they'd have nowhere to stay, and it's not that easy to get up there and back down in a day. But that's something that would have to be looked at.
Oh, I thought it was open again.
Maybe so.
Oh, okay. Let's look at that.
So I just want to go back for a sec to what Leanne mentioned about, like having an index of like who exists and what they can offer. And Celeste referred to that a little bit as well. And one of the key pieces that we learned over experiential tourism training is like, it's not just those obvious ones, right? So it's the people that are doing interesting things, but don't actually realize that there's a tourism product there. They don't realize that the things that they do every day that come naturally, people will pay for that experience. So that's the piece of not just thinking about the obvious pieces, right?
I think I agree with that. I just wanted to add further that I think it's a really great idea to get that inventory sorted out so that you get the whole spectrum of the available experiences in the north, and then maybe creating hub locations where people could travel to and start their experience, and then potentially have day trips from that hub where you're, depending on the weather or the season, going by canoe or some experience-based mode of transportation to the next community where there's a different activity, different experience, potentially seeing wildlife along the way, as Elaine noted. Just creating maybe a couple hubs from our inventory base and making the travel to another community for that regional community perspective. The travel could also be part of the experience, and it could go across seasons too, right? This could be in the winter, this could be in summer by a canoe or waterways.
Yeah, and that hub and spoke model is talked about quite a bit in Northern tourism, because we know that some of the small communities which have really interesting tourism aspects don't necessarily have accommodations, or the accommodations to the standard of what some visitors would be expecting. So yeah, I think that that's a really great point that you raised about having that sort of hub and then ability to do trips out from there.
And especially if they don't necessarily have accommodations in the smaller communities that want to still participate, you could do a half-day trip, and the travel to and from would enhance it, right? Allow accessibility to the community's resources, but you're not needing to find accommodations in that smaller community that's participating.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
On that blue card on the bottom, and the reason I asked for it to be smaller, I see exploration areas where there are some unique things on there. Like if you look, number 2, we're on the Ben Farm. It's Bison Farm. Yeah. You could be, you know, there's probably more on here. I don't know.
Yeah, my page is the way you see it there is that's the way it's printed for me too. So
yeah. So again, those are just ideas. Yeah.
Sorry, Becky. I know of, I mean, being born and raised in Thompson, you know, I know of many of the the things that are out there that I have just either come across in my past through either work or friends. And there's plenty of things out there, but I think the marketing of these things, I think, is one of the biggest mishaps or missteps that we've gotten on this now, because this is an excellent opportunity for regional experiential tourism to take place, and it could have been happening for months already. It's just we need that, I guess, that group or whatever to bring it together. And I think there'd be a lot of but it's not easy work. It's a lot of investigating and digging and contacts and whatnot, but you got to really find it out. But it is out there.
Definitely. Yeah. So what are some of those gems that, for the Northern Manitobans in the room, what are some of those gems that you know about? Andrea mentioned a few, like what are some interesting things that you think people would pay to have this experience?
Becky, I think in and around, can you hear me, Beck?
You bet.
Okay, I think in and around Cranberry Portage, there's a huge opportunity for canoe trips and using the Grass River chain, with all of its historic importance. And, I think there are opportunities, should people want to capitalize on them, about some, building some canoeing experiences in terms of experiential things. People would not necessarily have to worry about the accommodation. They could be setting up camping. It would be the true experiential, an outfitter putting them in at a certain point, making sure to outfit them with everything they need for setting up camps, having a guide with them. They could be harvesting food, whether it's, from the lake, and cooking together, introducing all sorts of culinary things. So, I can see that as something, and it could also link to the PAW if you kept with a canoeing, a canoeing idea. You could be talking about the Saskatchewan River as well. So there's lots of our areas that have canoeing opportunities for people that we wouldn't necessarily have to depend on huge pieces of infrastructure, but it might involve, lodges deciding that they're going to get on board with something like that. So that would be an opportunity, I think.
Right. And what if that experience, what if we included a really interesting local storyteller who could talk about the importance of the Grass River system, the fur harvesting, all of those pieces?
Yeah, that would be excellent.
I don't know what would be involved, but what about if they built the canoe together? I don't know how long that would take, but if you built the canoe together and then took it out.
Well, and I love the way you're thinking about that, Andrea. In Cranberry Portage, we also have a world-renowned sculptor. Perhaps they could make a stone carving of a canoe, and sit with Irvin Head, who's an Indigenous elder who could tell stories as well. Those are the types of pieces that tie this all together.
I think in the Thompson and the Nelson River region, we have a lot of potential with York Factory and the old fort there. I don't know if he's still doing it, but there used to be a guy in Gillam that gave jet boat tours. They'll take you from Gillam to the factory and back. And that you could make that to a regional tour trip. You see the packages for Churchill trips coming in from Winnipeg, but if you made that a package, you come into Thompson, you can go to Pishue Falls, and then on the way you spend a day in Split Lake or even York Landing because you're going to York Factory, and then you move on to Gillam. And then on the way to Gillam, you get that on the water, you see the wildlife, and you spend a day at historical. What is it, a federal historical site? It's a national park as well.
Yeah.
I think
for pieces of land that we don't have here, that there would be a name for a type of island or like there might be 10 names for different islands that took a whole sentence to describe in English. And I just think that what you said, Celeste, is so true. Like that just provided a whole new understanding to me of the connection the Cree in this village had to the land because of the language. And maybe that's another way to look at it, you know, and like finding these places, not just places where the fish are gathered or the geese are gathered, but just even the landforms and why these names are so important. And I think would be really quite amazing.
And that to me, and Diane, that to me is the differentiating aspect of Northern Manitoba. That's the magic, that's the promise, because it's incomparable with any other part of the world. Mm. It's there in that community, that rock, that landing place.
Mm-hmm. And Shannon, you were talking about how you do the capacity building, and I think this is Celeste's area, and he can speak to it better, but I think that a lot of it would be just sharing, like going out to different places that the Indigenous tourism, where Indigenous tourism has already been developed, and going and visiting and seeing how they've built their capacity, how they have gotten their skills. I know that there's one, it's not an Indigenous, but there's a place in Northern Ontario where they totally teach people survival skills. People go to be in the bush in the winter and learn and make. And this woman was selected to be on one of those survivor programs where they had to live for 100 days up in the Northwest Territories with an axe and a shoelace or something, you know, like, so she, and she's not Indigenous, but I just think that she has a model that I think would be really applicable and really help with the capacity building. But I'm just doing this anecdotally. I'm sure there's lots of others as well that could be done. And I think even there's people in Churchill, like I could give you names of people who are guides in the Arctic and Antarctic and live here in Churchill. And they have, you know, their Zodiac ticket and their wilderness first aid and their, you know, so you can put together a list of pretty hard skills that are needed for somebody to be safe. And not every individual needs them, but who in the community would need them and who would be interested. So I think there's a path to move forward. One end in terms of finding the inspiration and the models that would inform, like you wouldn't copy them, but that would inform you. And then the other one is, you know, the nuts and bolts of who needs what skills so people stay safe. And these might be different people than are the storytellers. Like in Churchill, there's the polar bear guards. I think the polar bear guards could be storytellers too, but now they're more the technical side. But I think there could be a whole experiential tourism side around polar bear guards. The ones I've met are amazing, amazing storytellers.
Shannon, if you were to build on this, I think one of the things that would be very easy to do right now during time of COVID is just to facilitate some virtual calls with a few of these operators across Canada that you can't actually travel to. So what comes to mind? Set up a call with a few of your colleagues that you would like to hear from Great Spirit Circle Trip on Manitoulin Island. Tell us about the experiences that you have been developing. How did you do that? How do you train and build capacity to that? Because they literally stopped their marketing program for 2 years to go into full experience development mode. They have a good model, a really good model. And Manitoulin Island in Ontario is not easy to get to necessarily. You have to go out of the way. So it's the same as going to Northern Manitoba. So that would be one of the first things that I think you could use your time right now during COVID to sort of say, okay, let's pull together the 3 virtual idea generation sessions to learn who's doing what and how they got to where they were. And then that will sort of be one step along the way to actually building capacity.
I think one thing that has to be looked at is who's the market. I know that in Churchill, most of the in usual years, most of the tourists who come here are international, and most of them are older. And I think that's partly because it costs so much money to come here. One can have a full week's vacation in the Caribbean for just flying Churchill, Winnipeg, return. So I don't know how that's dealt with, but I think that has to be looked at in terms of finding the experiences and identifying ones that are meet who can afford to come here. And also I love to find ways to bring other people here who want to come here, who might not have the money. Are there ways that can be done? So I know at one point when I was young, Via Rail was given subsidies by the government, but they weren't just handed the money, they had to take young people across the country. And I don't know why that's not done anymore, but it just seems so brilliant. I got to go to Newfoundland, and somebody from Newfoundland came back with me, and it was really exciting. There are government programs that I think could be looked into. Most of them right now are for bilingual, like English to French, but it might be a way to go after money. I can't remember the name of the program, but it's
CanRail Pass. I went from Quebec all the way to BC and back again by Via Rail, and it was called the CanRail Pass, and it was something like $140, and you could much as you want across.
But what I did was part of an exchange.
So it was called the Young Voyageur program. I went to Calgary.
Yeah, yeah. So there was 20 of us from Ottawa that went to Corner Brook, and 20 from Corner Brook who came to Ottawa. So it was a total experience. It wasn't just the rail. So
Shannon, do you want to read what Paula, or ask Paula to share what she shared in the chat box?
Yeah. Thompson has an annual fur table where trappers come into Thompson to sell their furs. You could connect with a trapper to learn how to set traps, how to prepare the hides, possibly go out on a trap line, culminating in attending the fur table to see the trappers sell their furs. I have never been to the fur table. I've seen snippets of it, and I want to go, and I'm hoping, Paula, if I can pick on you to tell us a little bit more about the fur table.
The fur tables are annually held, usually the weekend before Christmas. The actual trappers start coming in usually on Wednesday. The event doesn't start until Friday. I've been every year since I've started with the Chamber of Commerce, and it's exciting to see these people coming in. Thompson is one of the only places in Canada that actually offers a fur table for the trappers. And it's amazing, the people that come in, and you notice the trappers come in and they're very, very quiet. They sit around in small groups and just talk to each other. They don't, but a lot of the population from Thompson actually goes to the fur tables just to witness what's going on, and it's fantastic.
Shannon, if I can add some things, I've been involved with the fur tables in different capacities, and maybe Celeste, I'll go back a little bit, right? As part of Mystery Country International, we offered tours to Thompson for German soldiers at Shiloh. They used to bring recruits from Germany to Canada and North America for 2 weeks to recruit them into becoming a soldier. So we got a hold of that at that time, and we offered them 2 days in Thompson. Well, they had such a good time. They came back the next year for 3 days, the following year for 4 days. And one of the things we did, we put them on a bus, and we went for a 1-day travel north of Thompson, 1-day travel south of Thompson. And one time was stopping along the way at a trapper's cabin to literally see a trapper towards Split Lake with moose hanging, the moose meat hanging off the trees. And then in Split Lake, the chief gave a feast, and it was a beautiful presentation to the captain of the German army. And the presentation was from nation to nation. And they got to experience the dancing and the culture of the community at Split Lake. And we spoke to them about, wouldn't it be great, you still have some elders there who know how to make birch bark canoes. That skill is being lost. that if you could offer a birch bark canoe seminar or workshop to teach young kids in your community how to do that, and when that canoe is built, you could probably sell it to a rich German for $10,000 or $20,000, right? So that was the one thing that we tried for a number of years to do. And I'll go to one or two others to give an example. I'll explain the missing ingredient in each time. Spirit Way, over the last 10 or 15 years, has created an attraction as a warm-up act to Churchill. We know 20, 30,000 people a year go to Churchill. In most cases, they are not hunters, they're not fishermen, they're wildlife viewers and naturalists. They come from big cities, they have money, as somebody said, from distance and far, because they want to experience beluga whales and polar bears and so on and so forth, right? So we created this wolf mural and wolf statues in town, Spirit Way, as a one-day trip before or after their tours to Churchill, kind of like the warm-up act, thinking that's the way. So what we ended up doing, we began to realize there's a lot of interest around the world in certainly predator species like polar bears, but there also is with wolves. So I attended the fur tables, had a table there for 4 years, 2 days at a time, and I surveyed trappers to see, would you be interested? And, you know, I mean, we did this politely to say, you can shoot a wolf once and you get $200 for a pelt. But if you are a wolf storyteller or a wolf howler or a wolf education thing, or explain the respect that the indigenous community has for their wolves, that's a whole different game that could last 2 hours as people are waiting for a train to Churchill, or a full day, or a visit out to the, you know, your trapper's cabin and so on. Not everybody necessarily wants to see a wolf gutted or whatever, but there are some people who would do that. And what I learned there at the fur tables, there was two kinds of trappers. You had the young guys who are 19, 20 years old from Gillam or whatever, say, yeah, I trap wolves all the time. I see him, he's bubbly, he's outgoing. And I would say, would you be interested in, you know, getting a tour before Churchill to do storytelling, whatever? And they say, yeah, they do that. But you realize that that 19-year-old doesn't have a lot of traditional knowledge yet. The older trapper, the quiet one, who has a whole history of stories that are fascinating, doesn't have the confidence to talk to a group of 10, I'm going to say, boisterous Americans. Do you understand what I mean? So the missing ingredient always, over the last 30 years of all my tourism knowledge in Thompson, has been, I'm going to solve, however you call that, tour storyteller, the wolf guiding tour, is the entrepreneur who has to put that product and marketing together. And that's the dilemma that we have in the North. We have a lot of talent and a lot of experience, but nobody seems to understand the business management side of things to make that happen. And that's the difficulty. I mean, I've worked with Mystery Country International, with Thompson Limited, with Spirit Way, and time again, we find that's the missing ingredient. And I'm not sure how you solve
people who are ready to do that. So Shannon and I have been talking about that. How would that look? Maybe in OCN. I think there's other places, maybe at a fishing lodge where we could do that. Maybe the idea of the fur table is one of those experiences that could be coached into something that's very simple and executable, and work with 1 or 2 trappers. I was just in the other session with Colin, and he said something really interesting. He said, one of the challenges that we have in developing experiences is that you need somebody to step up as the first adopter. That person you develop an experience with, and then that has credibility, and you begin to share that credibility and that success, and it begins to develop some momentum over a 3 or 4 year period. So I would just sort of say, okay, if you know the trappers and you know the fur table in Thompson, start to think about who would be the right person to start with to coach a 1 hour experience or a 2 hour experience outside of Thompson, somewhere close by. And you develop that, put a price on it, and you make that available as a simple half-day trip.
So I think that's the missing ingredient. And I have dozens of surveys with names on them saying, yes, I might do this, yes, no, or maybe, in terms of the fur table. So there's a little bit of a database here if you want, right? Let me give you one other example. In 2017, with Travel Manitoba's help, we sent a team of 3 of us to England, to the city of Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton is a city in England that wanted 2 wolf statues. And we had already done that in Thompson. We got a hold of them. We said, we'd help you. They invited one of our artists to go there. So Jason Lucas, painted these 2 wolf statues. The city of Wolverhampton's short name that you say when you're in London, you say, I'm going to Wolves. You're going to the city of Wolverhampton. It's called Wolves. They have a Wolves soccer team. So we went there to do that. And while we were there, we promoted Thompson as the wolf capital and Churchill as the polar bear capital. And we said, we'll give a prize trip away. It ended up being a $30,000, 12-day, all expense paid trip that different components donated, which was wonderful. And that those people came the following year. An older couple wanted, it was in September 2018. When they spent 2 days in Winnipeg, they spent 2 days in Thompson, they spent a couple of days in Churchill. Unfortunately, that's the year that the rail line went down, and they were able to go to Churchill Wild, which is like an $18,000 package, for heaven's sakes, for 5 days. It's like world class, right? Anyway, interesting part of this was when they were in Thompson, I was their guest. I took them around different places, showed them Paint Lake. We went to Pisu Falls. We walked along, I mean, Pisu Falls, you can stand on one side of the falls, you can go across the suspension bridge and stand on the other side of falls. Now, this was the third week in September. The colors were stunning, right? Fall colors. We went to the other side, and the wind was just waving the trees. You know, the trembling aspen were rustling, which I didn't pay attention to. So the woman says, stop. I said, what? Do you hear this noise? I'm going, yeah, it's the tree. She says, I got to record this. I said, what? She recorded. She says, I have to take this back to BBC. I said, she's never heard a sound like this with the trees rustling. And she said, the air is so clean and crisp here because she comes from an industrial city in England. And you realize what we so take for granted. These are new experiences that people have when they certainly come from afar. And unfortunately, we just don't have the right people yet to be able to tell those short stories or share those experiences. But that's another example, right?
I think we do have those people. We need to coach them to take what they have as an ability.
Yeah, I didn't mean that. I mean, we haven't found them yet to turn those more into, you know, sort of.
Yeah.
You're right.
Shannon, what are you thinking about as you hear some of these possibilities?
I'm thinking about Volker's comment about the more experienced trapper and the trapper who's still learning, and my mind went to age gap, not only just an age or generational gap, but a knowledge gap as well. And then with the newer trapper having not so much experience, but having the personal capacity to build their entrepreneurialism, where my thoughts are, where does that fit? Where does I don't want to say course or program, but where or how would you say, we want to teach you to do this, and we want to teach you to do it safe, and if you really want, bring your grandpa along, bring your granny along.
You know what I would do in answer to the question? What I would do is go see Holly Cochin with ITAC and say, hey, Holly, we need to build some capacity around storytelling. People know the stories, but we want to develop that in the young people. Can you provide some funding for us to develop storytelling guides in the North? Work with her, create a proposal to do that.
Because the other thing that that came to mind as Volker was speaking was one of my favorite things to do, and I haven't done this since I was, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, was to go on the trap line, was to help clean gut, skin, trim hide, like all of that, getting right into it. And then at the end of the day, going home and Granny would have flour soup and bannock ready for us. That was like a day, right? And those are the experiences that I'm hoping that I want to see happen again. And I don't think that they happen enough, to be honest. And I don't know, I'm still with Volker on the entrepreneur and that capacity building. It's where's that kitchen gonna be, so to speak? Where am I gonna build this entrepreneur? You know, like sorry, I'm rambling.
No, that's great.
Just before we finish, I need to add one more thing here, please. I'm working right now with a number of people, including World Trade Center and NASCO, which is Northern American Strategy for Competitiveness, on hosting the first ever North American electrical vehicle rally in August of next year. That would be for the whole EV industry, which is growing incredible. And the idea would be that maybe 100 cars, whatever they start, would be in August. It's not a race, it's a rally. They could do their own time. People take family summer holidays off. They would start at the Gulf of Mexico. They would dip their toe in the warm salt waters of the Gulf of Mexico and end in Churchill and dip their toe in the cold salt waters of Arctic Ocean. Now, you can't get by car to Churchill, but you'd stop in Thompson, take the train or the plane and so on. And the idea would be they would drive up to Thompson on Highway 6 and come back down through Highway 10 on the west side. And we're now working with different communities like Ashern and Dauphin and the Paw to make, when that happens, that each one of those communities has sort of a welcoming, greeting, whatever is in their communities that is unique and exciting like that way, to literally get an EV circular route in our own province that goes the whole length as much as it can. Now there's a whole bunch of logistics in place and we're looking at a number of components to happen. There's a very unique aspect to target a very, very growing new audience, and that is the owners of electric cars. Because over the next 5 to 10 years, as some of you know, the future of transportation will change. It's going from gas-powered cars to electric cars. Manitoba wants to be first. But the idea of bringing the cultural component in as people stop at places, charge their cars, and having sideline trips, because this is a holiday, it's not a race. It can take as long as they want. And when they do the whole thing from one end to the other, they get a certificate and a prize because they've done it in the world, be the longest EV rally. So there's a whole bunch of experiential components to this that we want to build on over the next year.
You know what I love about this?
There's a certain amount of, sorry, I was going to add to what Volker was saying. There's a certain amount of charging time that's required at every stop along the way on the rally. So that's a perfect idea, Volker, for having each community that has a charging station to have some kind of a welcoming thing for the people who are on the rally. I like the idea. I mean,
there's a whole technical aspect of that. Charging stations are very unique. They're getting better and stronger and faster based on the cars and so on. We want to make sure that those communities understand, and there's federal funding available for that, to make sure that they have the right stations, where they are located, how many there are. That's a whole another technical aspect that we're working on. It's already being developed, certainly in the United States. Northern Manitoba is a little further behind. Right now, you can drive your electric car from coast to coast down south, but you can't go north. There's a big gap right now between Winnipeg and Thompson. And the idea would be that somebody who does that would put their car on a train and take it to Churchill and dip their tires in the coast of Hudson Bay and be the first one in the world to have done it. So there's some interesting marketing spins to this that we're working on that would be, I think over the next month or two, we want to get into the planning stages, which we're doing right now as we speak.
We'll have to get Arctic Gateway to put their first electric locomotive on the train tracks for us. Rally.
I just spoke to one of the people in Corpus Christi, because there's 2 cities down there. We're looking for them to be the start city. Galveston and Corpus Christi, they're both on the coast. I just learned that General Motors and Ford test cars in Corpus Christi for humidity and salt weather temperatures. Guess what? Thompson has a cold weather test site where Ford is. It's very proprietary, very secret. And last year, they were testing their first all-electric Mustang in Thompson. Secret. So would Ford now be a major corporate sponsor of this rally, knowing that they have testing in the, at the start city and at the end city? So there's all these interesting components that are starting to bubble up now. But again, it involves literally an EV tourism market with experiences in Manitoba communities. That's the goal here, to draw attention to our region of the world.
Shannon, when I hear this, one of the things that's interesting is that when a new experience is developed, we often look for the market to test that experience with. If there's an event like this already being planned, in which Volker is at the heart of planning this, then to me, it would be a very easy way of sort of saying, oh, as of such and such a deadline in 2021, this rally is taking place. Let's have 3 experiences developed. 3, not 10, 3. And you work, that's your deadline, you work back from. And so there's where you actually start to be very practical and sort of say, okay, which 3 experiences? And that's where you start. 10 years ago, I didn't have stories to share about the experiences across Canada. And that's how you develop experiences in Northern Manitoba. Start with a few, but start with piggybacking on an event that's already taking place, whether it's the fur table, whether it's the rally, whatever it is, start looking at that.
You know what I did in September, my wife and I were also getting a little cabin blues here. I mean, our ski trip last spring was canceled because the whole world was shutting down. We couldn't go and leave. So we said, let's take a few days off in September. We drove to Riding Mountain National Park just to be able to get away and then to Winnipeg. And along the route, I stopped in Depas, Swan River, Dauphin, Neatport to say, would your community be interested in participating in an international event? And they're all like, said, of course. So then I could not get a hotel room in Wasagaming because it was full. I couldn't believe it, right? Even though that, because Travel Manitoba has been doing a good job telling Manitobans to stay in their own province. So the damn hotel rooms were full. So we had to stay in on and off. I was trying to find a place somewhere around Riding Mountain where we could book. I didn't even know this place existed. I found it, and it was called, oh, good grief, I can't remember the name. It's a small bed and breakfast just outside of Onanall. We stayed there. Wonderful, wonderful place. Great woman who runs the operation. So we took a, you know, spent some time in Onanall looking around. We went to a sort of a arts and crafts shop. We found different things, and we had a great time the whole day in Onanall, for heaven's sakes. I didn't know the place existed. And you realize we have all these little jewels around that even on TripAdvisor, you can't find them. We found them just by accident because they wouldn't have been in business 5 or 6 years, right? So
it's yeah, I think it has the name B in it.
Yes, yes. Oh, good grief! I don't know. I just lost it here for a minute.
Well, and the building actually came from Wasagaming and was moved outside the park, and it's just.
And this couple is doing some wonderful things, and how they run their business is just, I can't believe it. It was a great experience, right? And then we would drive every day into Wasagaming, you know, tour around and go to the other.
So I think the piece that I'm gathering, Shannon, from this that I'm really loving is that we have to start having these conversations. It's from these conversations that we will begin to see where the starting point is. So I think we often get stuck up here about too many ideas. Stop thinking about too many ideas. Just take 2 or 3 of them and start working on them.
Yeah, and you know what?
I'm going to give a heads up to David to bring us all back together.
A number of years ago, my Thompson Ski Club that I'm very actively involved with had a 40th anniversary. So we
I am going to ask Becky and Shannon and Stephanie as soon as they come into the room. A couple of quick questions here. Steph and Becky, and where's Shannon? Where's Shannon? There she is. Could you sort of give us some highlights just of things that were being discussed in your breakout room? You don't need to list everything, but just 2 or 3 things. Give us some teasers of what was being highlighted, or an idea that emerged as being relevant that you'd like to share with the larger group.
I guess I'll start. I was actually in conversation in regards to the lodges and.
Oh, sorry. Can I just break in for a second? This is good. There were 3 different situations. So could you just quickly describe your situation, Becky and Shannon as well too, just so that everybody has the context of what you were talking about. Thanks.
We were looking at value added for lodges, how we can add to that, because we know that their standard market isn't necessarily here anymore. And so with the shifting of COVID and people with a tendency to travel in cohorts, your cohort now is not your fishing buddies. There needs to be some more diversification. So some of the ideas that we've added were a tour with a medicine woman. And so if you've got an area with several lodges, all those lodges can feed into that one service. So now you can have an activity that appeals to the young son and his dad, and they're off out fishing. And then you've got, your more traditional travelers that are wanting to learn about the foraging and the trapping, a trapper for the day. Really, it was about adding some other opportunities within those lodges to tie into them, whether it's the lodge owner themselves offering it or working in conjunction with somebody else, but expanding that dynamic so now you can fit more than just your typical hunter and fisher and still bring in your revenue.
Anything else from your group?
One of the comments that came up that we had discussed was the idea of just the, I guess, the ecosystem and then the knowledge behind your foliage in the area, and also the animals. A trapper for the day, just being aware of an impact that a beaver or a wolf has on that area and the significance and the value and the importance, and then all the spiritual and the historical, cultural impacts that can also add this value.
Thanks, Steph. Shannon?
So we were talking about revenue generating story driven experiences. So how do you turn a story into $1, so to speak, in a nutshell, I guess. And we also talked about foraging, trapping, those types of tours. We took a deeper dive into entrepreneurialism and capacity building and the need to fill a knowledge gap, so to speak. And the comparison we used was a more experienced trapper, somebody who had been doing it 50, 60 years, say, versus a trapper who is just learning, and how the older trapper is the one with all the stories and the experiences that people are searching for, and the newer trapper just hasn't had that time to develop his own skills and hasn't absorbed a lot of knowledge, so to speak, when it comes to trapping. And then we talked about the fur tables and that experience as well, and some of the that Thompson has put in to build on that time. It was, as for where we went, it was a lot of ideas. We didn't really narrow anything in. I think it was just the excitement of having and hearing all the ideas put on the table. That was our group.
Thank you, Shannon. Becky?
Awesome. Well, thank you. So we had sort of two, what I would say, larger themes that guided our conversation. So one was around the need for like an inventory or an index of what's available, who's out there, so that we can approach them and talk about how we can collaborate. And then the other piece was, I think for Northern Manitoba, it's really key that we look at this hub and spokes model. So we know that we have a lot of smaller communities that don't have accommodations or don't have accommodations that would be up to standards for a lot of visitors, not necessarily market ready. And so that need for using larger centers like Thompson or the Paw as that jumping off point, and then having day trips out from there. So I thought that was really interesting as it frames our conversation. And then I sort of heard, as I group ideas, I see sort of three potential regional multi-day tours. So one around Thompson with artists, wildlife viewing, and pieces around Thompson. And then we talked about one around paddling the Grass River. And then we talked about York Factory, Gillam, Split Lake, that really unique exclusive experience of visiting York Factory. So yeah, that was the regional tourism one for us.
Was there anything else?
We did talk about Fishing Lodge just briefly, and again, just echoing the need for more experiences that could appeal to families, and then thinking about our shoulder seasons as well, and rentals, winter experiences. What, Leanne, was there anything else that you heard that I didn't capture there?
Just wanted to touch on the first one with the regional stuff. Some of the opportunities, of course, being, the various opportunities, but really there's lots of also the increasing the Indigenous experiential tourism, whether it's camps, culture camps, or you know, sweat lodges, things like that, because I think that that would be a great opportunity. And then with the fishing lodge one, the one piece was, I guess, the seasonality of what opportunities for in various seasons are out there.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I popped into 2 rooms. I didn't get to the one that was with Becky, and it was rich, the conversation that was happening. I want to try to tie a few things together, if I could, that relate to both the presentation that was in front, but let me just sort of summarize the 3 situations that we were talking about as we went into our breakout rooms. One was, how do we add value to fishing lodges that are challenged at this particular point in time? Not only because of COVID, but in terms of thinking longer term, in terms of different potential new audiences that fishing lodges, those who wish to, could reach out to. The second scenario or second situation was, is it possible to do multi-community driving or combination of driving, flying tours in Northern Manitoba? And if there is that possibility, how would the experiences be different in each of those communities? I remember a trip that I took down into Ecuador, and it's very interesting because one village only made hats. Another village only made religious wooden sculptures. Another village did something else. And so if we had an ability, if you had an ability to begin to ask, what is it that's unique to some of these communities that could be built out as an experience? Focus on that. Then what happens is people can travel to those communities over many days and not have duplication between those communities. And the third thing, which was Shannon's group, was they were looking at, well, who are the storytellers? Where are they? What are their stories and what do they have to share? So here's how I want to sort of tie some of this together, because they're really important next steps. If I could say one thing first, it would be keep it simple. Sometimes we make these things too damn complicated. So make this simple. And Volker in Thompson offered an example. So he's working on this crazy thing that's going to be happening next year of a rally of 100 electric vehicles arriving from the Gulf of Mexico and arriving in Northern Manitoba. They're already coming. Can you build on things that are already happening and simply add an experience to that event? That's a simple way of doing things. And the fur table that's happening in Thompson is another example of something that's already happening. And it's a story. And how do we build on that? The dilemma that was presented probably in every breakout room is one you're not unfamiliar with, but you need to do something about it. And that is building capacity around creating an experience. So on the one side, you've got Travel Manitoba helping us to market to the world, to Manitobans, to the rest of Canada. And we have these storytellers. But in the middle, we need to coach that story into an experience. And so we talked in Shannon's group about, well, why not start working with ITAC to actually create a proposal to develop a suite of storytelling guides. They get trained in storytelling or take the stories that they have and make them accessible as experiences. Entrepreneurship is built into it, so it's understood as business development. And you start with 2 or 3 simple experiences. And don't wait for tomorrow. Don't wait to build something big. You start with what you have. And that's, I think, a common theme is that each of the rooms, we're talking about things that already exist, people who have those stories. I think that the second I observed or heard was this idea, was the reality, we don't have to go searching for these things. They already exist. It's how we take and convert on that. And I honestly, I tend to be, and this is me, I love putting a deadline for myself. And I would say to all of you, rather than thinking of this as a possibility, and Ryan, I certainly welcome your input on this. If these ideas have already been talked about today, I would say, make it happen. And Colin sort of joined in at the beginning of the first breakout room that I was at. He said, you know, one of the challenges that we face is this idea that we're not sure who to start with. Start with one person. Somebody who's positive, who's a champion, build out the experience, then start sharing the success of that. What's going to happen is that people are going to see that success and start working with it. So I'm going to flip it back over to Oswald and sort of say thank you for the rich conversations that were happening in each of those rooms. They were really good. They were instructive. And I think if I learned anything as someone peeking into Northern Manitoba, you have everything already in place. Now, just do what Nike says. Just do it. Create the experience. Oswald, Colin, thoughts?
Thanks, Celeste. You know what? I'll say one thing just from what you just finished talking about, and we heard this in regards to our room as well, about the existing infrastructure to keep things simple. There's a lot of investments already in lodges and in other tourism assets, and how to build on that. I like the theme from what Becky was talking about as well, about the creation of that pool of assets. I remember when Colin said at the start, when it came to the fishing lodges, it's not like quite often, it's not like they don't appreciate what additional values that they can add. It's just that they're so focused for such a long time on what they're currently doing, is that they just mindset wise don't want to have to tackle something else as well. So if we may make it a little easier for them, if we start to get that inventory of experience of what other people can do in partnership with these lodges, I think that will go far ways. And that's where we talk about the collaboration. I remember a friend of mine went down to Sturgis years ago, and he came back. He said, you know what? If people are going to make a trip up to Thompson or to the Paw or to Flin Flon, 700 to 800 kilometers, you need more than just one spiritway. You need about 40 spiritways. You need a multitude of attractions. So that regional approach, I've heard that quite often, and I think that's the way to go, is that you need to give people an excuse. When you don't have one big boulder like say Churchill has with the polar bears, you need a whole lot of pebbles and rocks to make that trip worthwhile. So I love the way the discussion went. I think we're going way with some real, from a CDF Look North view, I think where we're seeing some of those broad themes that are emerging, and I do want to thank everyone for that discussion. Sorry, you're saying as well, Colin. I know, Colin, did you want to add anything on that?
I will only add that all the ingredients are in the north. It's just a matter of putting them together. Mm-hmm. They're there. But we've had this discussion before, and we've got to move it from discussion to reality.
Thank you. And I think that's a good closing note. I think we have to stop just talking about it. I think we need to really go forward, and that's why with all the notes that have been captured, we are putting that forward into a report, and we are going to be doing some with the new CEO that's coming in towards the end of the year, as well as our Look North staff. We'll be putting that forward as some actionable items in 2021. We have retained Celeste as well for next year to perhaps put some more meat on bones of some experiential tourism assets that we can flush out. So in saying that, unless anyone, Celeste, do you want any closing notes on this, or?
No, that's great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. So just a reminder to everyone that tomorrow our forum continues. We are going to be talking about sustaining and growing value-added opportunities in the northern commercial fishing industry. Of course, that industry has undergone a lot of changes, a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities as well. The forum starts at 10. If anyone who's not signed up for that is interested in that forum, please email Leanne at lbrown@cedf.mb.ca. I do want to thank specifically Shannon, Becky, and Stephanie for leading our forum breakout rooms today. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and I hope enjoy the rest of the day. and we will talk to you tomorrow.